Welcome, everyone, to Latter Daily Digest. We honor creators, and this week we are honoring John DeLynn because it's his birthday week. But today, in particular, is his birthday. And thanks to Ganesh Cherian for coming on the show to talk about John.
Thanks. And happy birthday, John. Look, you've done a lot for Mormondom across the spectrum, and you deserve to be celebrated. So excited that we can do that today.
So it's a little bit of a different from all the other episodes. We're just going to get right into what Ganesh, cut his teeth on for Mormon Stories. So tell us about sort of what you were thinking when you first clicked buttons that had John DeLynn's name in the or Mormon Stories in the title.
Well, gosh, John DeLynn had already become, by the time that I was going through my faith transition, a pariah. He had been labeled somebody who was anti-Mormon, and listening to his content was certainly not recommended. I was obviously, deeply worried about some of the things that I was learning through the church, particularly in the gospel topics essays. But I was still quite afraid to go outside of the mainstream church to look at, some other ideas.
Untrusted sources, we'll say.
Correct. So the real reason I cut my teeth on Mormon Stories was through Richard Bushman, because, of course, he was a faithful member of the church who wrote the 2005 biography, Rough Style Rolling. And John had interviewed him in 2007 for Mormon Stories and done quite an extensive line of questioning. And I was really interested in hearing about Richard's perspective. And I was willing enough to have somebody a little bit critical, I thought, poke at him to understand his viewpoint. And so, I listened to those episodes. They weren't video back then, of course, so they were only audio, but I listened to them with great intent, and I really just came to admire John's fabulous interviewing skills and his ability to be hard and soft in all of the right places, where, asking a historian about their work, but also, going deeper and finding really interesting ways of looking at things. So that was both fascinating and really enlightening. And it gave me a huge respect for John that carried on. It took me quite a long time before I started listening to his episodes more regularly, but certainly from that one and Richard Bushman's interview, I started to especially look at the ones that he had done with Mormon historians and scholars and people who were looking at the church very academically, and were able to speak confidently about the issues that the church had and the ways that it was playing out in Mormon communities.
And about how long ago was it when you first heard the Richard Bushman interview?
It was probably 2015, so
okay,
a long time after it was recorded. And of course,
but right after you had noticed that there were gospel topics essays.
Yes, and I'd started to look at those really in depth, and I'd already had some issues prior to that, and the gospel topics gospel topics essays allowed me to look at that a bit more creatively and critically, and also gave an avenue to do so because it was a church, sponsored, look at some of these issues. And then, of course, that allowed me to then look at other sources and really discover a lot more about Mormon history.
So is in a way the Richard Bushman interview sort of a genesis of you starting a thought in your mind that you might write about Joseph Smith someday?
Gosh, it wasn't even on the radar, but yes, I think that that idea that Joseph was not this epitome of deity really that I had understood really made a huge difference, and it did give me the confidence to kind of look at him as a real human being. After listening to that Richard Bushman episode, I went and read Dan Vogel's Making of a Prophet. Richard Bushman's stuff was still really too thick to really digest, but that helped me understand Joseph as a much more complex character, and his involvement in the beginnings of Mormonism, started to become really fascinating.
I think the worst I had heard about Joseph Smith was that he wrestled on Sunday, or he was stern with some people sometimes, but there wasn't really much depth of character that we had learned about Joseph Smith in the regular Sunday school classes. And so at first finding out things about him was like, well, he is a flawed person. Maybe I could be prophet someday because I have flaws as well. So it gave me hope, right? And then it became, oh, well, I haven't done that yet. I haven't, married 20 people before I told my wife about it.
Yeah, and I think you really need to get to that kind of level before you can be prophet, Gene. So, there's still a little bit of work to be done in that regard.
That's right. My rough stone is only rolled halfway down the hill, we'll say.
Yeah. It might have done some sliding rather than rolling. Really needs to gain some momentum.
I am the rough stone that maybe slid backwards a lot.
the
backsliding stone rolling.
Yes.
And
well, the other oddity of coming to kind of Mormon stories around 2015 was, of course, this was the time when John went through his excommunication, and that was incredibly painful, and it did show in a lot of those interviews. And of course, I was going through my own painful realizations at those same times, and I could hear his angst in his podcast, but also like he managed to maintain a really lovely pushback, even of those that were critical, and I appreciated that because I was getting very critical at that point. The mirror of him going through that at the same time, but also him pushing back on others that were going through that, gave a little bit of reflection that I think was really important and really clever as a person who's, going through their own pain, but also recognizing that their experience was not the same as everybody else's. So I've, since come to really be very appreciative of John as a person too, right? He's his own, character. Here, he's not perfect by any means, but he's genuinely caring. The kinds of reach outs that people give to him and the harrowing stories that he carries, I think is incredible that he's not more critical, that he's not more overwhelmed by the sense of pain, because there's a lot of people who only confide in him about some very serious, incredibly difficult trauma, and he is very gracious, incredibly empathetic, and the fact that it doesn't overwhelm him to the point of despair is a real treasure for our Mormon community, because he's able to then take those stories, honor them, and express them to the greater community without overwhelming them with the kinds of things that he gets, and yet gives them voice, enables them to be honored, but also relieves trauma, because lots of people have had those experiences. So he's a gift to Mormonism.
And in his when Maven Brody and Megan Connor and I got to interview him a few weeks back, he mentioned that he has to compartmentalize and not be overwhelmed with the sad tales that he's hearing. And he's actually gone through therapy now to try to work back to being not so jaded or protected from those stories, so he can try to, sit with them, and maybe even in the future he'll be able to honor people's pain even more. I don't know what that would look like, but he says that it's definitely affects him, but as a guard, he tries not to think about it too much while he's doing the shows.
Yeah. And look, he's made huge sacrifices. He lives in Utah, in the heart of things. That means he's very recognizable. That also means that, going out in public can be a source of anxiety. He's a big character. He's a very tall man, very broad, but there's
Can't
also,
miss him.
yeah, you can't miss him. But he does carry that weight of, will people recognize me? Will they be excited to see me if they recognize me? Could I suffer some abuse? Who am I with? What am I doing? Like there's just that anxiety. And at the same time, there's a great love of his experience growing up in the church. And he's surrounded by artifacts of church in his community, in his environment, and he has a lot of love for that too. So there's kind of all of these emotions that he plays with, that I think he navigates incredibly well. So I'm in awe of that. I think he's an incredible person. I've got to spend some time one-on-one with him, and he's as genuine in person as he is in his interviews. So it's lovely.
That's right. And happy birthday to John. That's why I'm doing this, to celebrate his birthday and all he's done. And next month starts the 20th year of Mormon Stories. Here's to John. Thanks for all you do, John.
Great work, John.
That's right. Everybody have a nice summer. Like, share, and subscribe. Help promote the work that John's doing. That's what we're trying to do here. All right. Bye-bye.
Fabulous.